people in industries and other countries who ask about the Rooney Rule and have adopted the Rooney Rule because of the success that it's had, not only in the NFL, but it makes sense. I think it's had an enormous impact on the NFL. But as I say, I think what makes Dan so proud of this, and he's mentioned it so many times, and he was always a little bit shy of saying the Rooney Rule, but he said it with a lot more pride in the last few years because he recognized that the impact it was having well beyond the boundaries of the NFL and well beyond sports.
Football lost a legend and a pioneer in Steelers Hall of Fame owner Dan Rooney yesterday. Jerome Bettis, who played a decade under Dan Rooney, won a Super Bowl with him. What did he mean to you?
He meant so much because, you know, he did so much for each and every one of us, not just me. It was every player that had played for the Steelers. He had some type of, you would have some type of interaction with Mr. Rooney, and he did so much. So, you know, for example, my parents were coming to every single football game. He found out that they were coming to all the games, and so he brought me in the office, and he said to me, did your parents come to every game? I said, yes, they've been coming. I tried to downplay it. He says, no, that's fine. He says, I want to make sure they have good seats. I don't want them to be up at the top of the stadium. I want them to be right behind us. So I want to give them a pair of my seats. And so it was one of those things where I never saw it coming. I never asked for that, but some kind of way he found out this was something that would benefit me, and he made it happen. And that's just a small part, but he did so many things for so many guys like that.
But in terms of being thoughtful, I mean, with so much going on,
I left out of there thinking to myself, wow, what, I mean, who does that?
Paying attention to every detail, no, for sure. Stephen A?
Well, obviously, as a Steelers fan, you know, I know what he's meant, you know, to Steeler Nation and beyond, but as an African-American, he's just this very, very special man. The Rooney Rule is named what it's named because of him. He's somebody that recognized the discrepancies in the hiring practices that existed within the National Football League. He was someone that was incredibly cognizant about it, and he championed the cause of minorities in the world of professional football. And not only that, not only did he mandate that a minority candidate should be interviewed, he went out and hired one in Mike Tomlin, who's proven to be pretty damn great. When you take that into consideration, and then you look at the legacy of the Pittsburgh Steelers, who from the year 1969 to now have only had 3 coaches. The great Chuck Noll, and then after about 22, 23 years, from there it was Bill Cowher for another 15 years, to Mike Tomlin the last 10 years. He goes out and he hires a minority candidate who comes there, delivers a Super Bowl championship, takes them to 2 Super Bowls, a few trips to two AFC championship games. There's just nothing to question or nothing to say in regards to that other than the laudables that we throw in his direction. And then when you take it a step further, we go back to ESPN.com and we look at an article that was here. It was written in July, last July, Jerome, Max. It was written last July. And the author was Mike Sando, ESPN senior writer. And he talked here about teams had taken a chance on 21 first-time white head coaches and only 1 first-time minority head coach in Todd Bowles. They're coming into this season. He talked about the fact that over the last 21 years, I mean, you're going back to 1997, actually. Herm Edwards was hired back then, and he was the first time, you know, hire. That's what they talked about here. You just look at some of the things, the inroads that were created by Tony Dungy and the tree that emanates from him, and you look at offensive coordinators or coordinators in particular, and how that's usually a prerequisite for getting a head coaching job. But like 80 out of the 85 coaches that had been hired or what have you, all of whom were white, were offensive coordinators. And so, I'm sorry, coordinators, not offensive, but just coordinators. You look at all of those different things. But just to be specific, 80 of the NFL's current 85 offensive coordinators, quarterback coaches, and offensive quality control coaches were white. And so you think about that stuff, and you think about what what Mr. Rooney was working against, and how he still pushed for this rule to be implemented into the National Football League. It's not the fix-all. It's not the be-all, end-all. But the fact that he was so conscientious is something that any minority especially should deeply, deeply appreciate. We suffered a tremendous loss today in losing him, and I'm glad Jerome is on the show. And my heart goes out to his family, the Steelers organization, and Steeler Nation, and Steeler fans everywhere.
I'm an enormous admirer of the Rooney family and of Dan Rooney, and it's not just because of the Rooney Rule, although that's emblematic of why I'm an admirer of his. But, you know, this is a guy who inherited a fortune, Stephen A., and showed that in American life, we see this throughout the sports world, and even in the real world, maybe especially in the real world. Just because you've inherited your fortune doesn't mean you have to be a know-nothing jerk who makes the world a better place through a worse place, excuse me, through bullying the powerless. Rooney inherited a fortune and used his position of power to make the world a better place, and that's a great thing. You mentioned the Rooney Rule. Even the way they went about it, like, you can say, because there are problems with it, you could say, well, you could just be a perfunctory meeting and it's just filling a quota and all this, but undeniably, things have gotten at least incrementally better as a result of that rule. But it's not just that. I think about the 2008 election, Stephen A., the general election, when Pennsylvania hung in the balance in the Electoral College, and Rooney came out and supported then candidate Barack Obama. And whatever side of the aisle you're on, considering the history of this country, at the very least, that was an historically significant position to take. And let's assume that that influence was more than zero. And considering the kind of affection Barack Obama has for Dan Rooney, maybe you figure that he also believes it was more than zero. He had potentially a profound effect on a major historical kind of turning point, you'd hope, in the history of this country. Yeah. He was a significant figure, not only in American kind of sporting landscape, but in American life, and he'll be missed. And I've always been a great admirer of his. And unfortunately, frequently, the only time you can really talk about someone this way, you know, is when you're eulogizing them.
The thing about it is what we also have to remember is that he reminded this nation that while embracing equality for all, you don't have to compromise the bottom line in doing so. The Pittsburgh Steelers have been to 8 Super Bowls. They've won 6 of them. And all of this transpired in the midst of him, you know, advocating on behalf of the disenfranchised and the dismissed along the way. And so when you look at it from that perspective and the fact that he had the conscience to recognize unfairness, to recognize inequality, to recognize prejudice and beyond within his own league, and to challenge the league that obviously he was a huge figure in, to be better and to coax them into doing just that. You just can't say enough about a man having that conscience. It's what we aspire America to be about. We're looking at individuals and we're asking them to touch their hearts, look inside their heart and their soul, and recognize when something's not right, recognize when something is unfair, and be God-fearing enough and conscientious enough to do something about it. That's what he did, and that's what makes him so great.
And as much as he did for the country and as much as he did for the NFL, he did even more for the city of Pittsburgh in terms of bringing the team and ingratiating the team into the city and making the players do things in the city. This was something that wasn't, you know, a mainstay years and years ago. This was something that it started from Mr. Rooney wanting to be a part of the community and then saying, you know what, we're going to forge this relationship with this team and the community. And over the years, and as I got there, it was already in place. And so you understood that that relationship was there and that you were to embrace that and then you were encouraged to do more in the community. And that wasn't something that was just, you know, to all talk. That was action. And Mr. Rooney was the leader in that category. And for my foundation, he always found a way to support my foundation, and they give a donation. They always did so much for the community of Pittsburgh, and I think that's, you know, a part that no one actually sees, but the city of Pittsburgh would definitely remember that.
Stephen A., you made the point, you know, doing the right thing can be good for business. That's something that shouldn't be lost on people. And in terms of the values in that family that are demonstrated through their behavior, Dan Rooney's a guy who did the equivalent of starting in the mailroom. It's not like just one day he's of age, now I'm going to take over the team. He learned every facet of the team, had to work his way up. And really put in the work so that by the time he reached the position he did, he was fully capable of doing the great things that he did. It's a lesson for American life and business, in fact.
No question. We need more men like him in positions of power, a life well lived, and a lasting legacy far beyond football. Thank you so much for being with us. When we come back, Eli Manning is finding himself in hot water due to a possible memorabilia scam. Is this just another knock on the family that once seemed perfect? Plus, with Kevin Durant gone, Russell Westbrook finds himself the lone star on the Thunder. Will the upcoming series with the Rockets reveal that he needed KD all along? Stay tuned for that combo.